Long live the king.
Welcome back to the channel, folks, and today I'm diving back into the world of the monsterverse, talking all things Godzilla and of course King Kong. Obviously, we are set to get the much hyped Godzilla King of the Monsters, in fact, in a few short months, although I'm sure many people will think that it is just that little bit too far out of reach, myself included. And then, after the beast that is Godzilla has presumably been crowned King of the Monsters, he will be going up against the King of Skull Island, King Kong, in Godzilla vs. Kong, releasing in 2020. But what happens after Godzilla vs. Kong? This video will be exploring how the monsterverse can continue, but also trying to decipher the ins and outs of the rights deals and what Toho plans to do with their property, Godzilla. So a lot of people comment on my videos, and among those comments, many people assume that the monsterverse will be continuing after Godzilla vs. Kong. They out and out state, categorically, the movies make too much money. Of course, they will be continuing. We have to remember that Toho have effectively hired out Godzilla to Legendary. This is not an indefinite deal, and in fact, from all the information that I could find, it is a high potential chance that this rights deal will end after Godzilla vs. Kong. The initial press release, when Legendary had acquired the rights, was simply announcing a partnership for one movie, though they did state how they looked forward to seeing where Godzilla's stomping would take them, obviously implying that if the movie did well, they would branch off outwards and expand into more, which is precisely what they did. The rights deal, as per the initial statement, was that Toho would handle the distribution of Legendary's Monsterverse movies in the Japanese markets, and Legendary would co-produce and co-finance movies with Warner Bros. For the domestic and Western markets, also handling the distribution over here. Now obviously, this deal would have cost Legendary an awful lot of money. Toho was incredibly smart about this and released Shin Godzilla 2 years after the 2014 Godzilla movie. Although Toho would have gained a lot of money from this rights deal, they also gained a great deal of exposure for their property and brand. This is also a huge factor into why Toho likely licensed out their property to Legendary to begin with, and why it makes sense that after a series of movies from the Western production companies, Toho will regain control of said property, having now acquired a newfound worldwide fanbase. Although, of course, it had a gigantic one anyway. Which I feel is a really important thing to note when we start to take a look at the ins and outs of this rights deal, because when Legendary then announced that they would release Kong Skull Island and that it would be part of the monsterverse that they were establishing, they brought a new creature into the whole rights situation. Now, King Kong is an interesting one, because as per a court case between Universal and Nintendo, where Universal claimed Donkey Kong was infringing on Universal's King Kong copyright, the courts ruled that Kong is in fact owned by 3 different parties, but those particulars are all very specific incarnations of King Kong. Now this particular movie, Godzilla vs. Kong, can be considered a remake of the Toho movie, which had the rights licensed from Miriam C. Cooper's estate, the original creator of the intellectual property King Kong. However, as per my research, Legendary actually brought the projects from Universal. Whether this means Universal had something in the works, or whether Legendary brought the rights to use the character from Universal, isn't entirely clear. And that's the thing with these rights deals, there's very little transparency offered to the public. But as it stands, Toho have come out and stated very publicly that they plan to make their own reboot of the Godzilla universe in 2021, now known as Worlds of Godzilla, a form of Godzilla cinematic universe for their own domestic market. Now, although this is not clear-cut confirmation that the rights deal will end at this point with Legendary, the Toho Legendary rights deal anyway, it does lead one to believe that it is a possibility, because previously they had only made one movie during the licensing period, and it was the most financially successful Shin Godzilla. It only featured Godzilla though, and that's again really important to note. This reboot in 2021 is an entire cinematic universe that they're planning. The interesting thing here though is that during the production of Shin Godzilla, something that I feel people often overlook when discussing the rights deals, Toho came out and stated categorically, this is very good timing after the success of the American version this year. If not now, then when? The licensing contract that we have with Legendary places no restrictions on us making domestic versions. So taking a look at it, Toho legally are not obligated to hold off making on any movies during the rights deal. Their timing of kickstarting their own universe in 2021 is actually a really smart one. It's a calculated one, and it's much like the release of Shin Godzilla, as per that quote, which I quoted directly. They are banking on the next two MonsterVerse movies being huge successes, and the Western markets being more interested in their property, Godzilla, and thus capitalizing on that interest and making much more money. Now, the reason many people think that the rights deal ends in 2021 is Legendary was super quick to come out and announce the next few movies, even when they were years away, which logic would dictate they had put all their eggs in one basket and were banking on those slated movies being incredibly successful. They have Godzilla vs. Kong in production during the post-production of Godzilla King of the Monsters, which is a true indicator of a few things. Their confidence in their movie, but also the potential rights deal lapsing and them having to get movies done quickly and put them out quickly. Remember, Hollywood is a business, and as such, each movie has the potential to be hugely successful or a huge financial loss and a ruin for production companies. Having a movie in production before the previous one has even been released is a huge risk, and it's something which we very rarely see, only nowadays from the likes of, say, Marvel and, well, barely even DC in this day and age. So it indicates to me that this is due to the rights deal potentially lapsing, but again, this is conjecture, as we know Toho can and have made movies during the rights deal. So let's kind of touch on the MonsterVerse continuing, right? So if the rights deal does lapse, how can the MonsterVerse continue? Well, I touched on it very briefly in a previous Godzilla video, and as such I thought it was best to expand it a little, because, you know, not everyone will agree with me here, and I know that, but if the rights deal does lapse, Legendary will have no access to the Godzilla property. Their only hope is to continue with Kong, and that's why I touched on the Kong rights being a little bit of a hazier topic, and the fact that they brought the Kong property from Universal. This is a property which is very much more readily accessible to the Legendary studio. And it's interesting as well, the movies at this point in time are ramping in a way that people have said is almost anticlimactic. So you got to take a look at this and say why. Because we've got Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, then Godzilla versus Kong, which really does seem a bit of a reverse of the direction that it should be going. The reason, of course, is because King Ghidorah is undoubtedly stronger and historically, in all of the original source material, much more deadly than King Kong, and a much more worthy adversary to Godzilla, one could say. So why would Legendary be going this particular route unless they were going to potentially have Godzilla and Kong fight for a bit and then have to team up? This team up may result in Godzilla's death, and then you can have King Kong lead the MonsterVerse in future, potentially with the new kaiju that Legendary have created. Now, that to me makes sense, and I'm not going to say it makes sense in terms of, say, movies and it's the best way to go, but what I mean by it making sense is that it makes sense given the information that we have and how Legendary are setting their movies up. With the fact that Ghidorah is going against Godzilla, then Godzilla against Kong, it's a really strange way to do things and to build and ramp. It really does almost seem backwards. So someone also pointed out that a Screen Rant article had stated that Godzilla and Kong wouldn't be teaming up against anything. Look, it's important to note that this is pure conjecture, it's pure theory, and it's pure speculation, much like this video here, although the rights things which I had stated are out and out fact, unless I had stated otherwise. But it's really important to note that although this is speculation here, it is backed by a logical conclusion, taking everything into account, the rights deals, the way that Legendary are pushing their movies forward, and also what Toho is doing. So anyway, there we have it. Let me know all your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you are new here, please do hit that subscribe button, and if you like this video, give it a like and a share. As always, I've been Mr. H. Take care.